infamous Mount Shasta. On a hiking trail, he met a Native American local to the area. This local shared tales about spirit beings inhabiting the region. These entities, he claimed, were masters of the skies, morphing from deer to, well, something else entirely. He didn't want to share too many details, fearing he would be summoning evil spirits, but he did mention an eerie phenomenon: deer tracks that would abruptly end, only to be replaced by a mysterious set of bipedal prints, distinctly non-human. As Eric's journey neared its end, something extraordinary happened. The peak of Mount Shasta was suddenly bathed in a brilliant blue light, a flash that engulfed the entire summit. Eric has no idea what he saw, but he swore to never go back to the mountain. Tracy, only 9 at the time, was in the car with her mom. It was just a regular drive until she spotted something unusual in the sky. Her mom, curious but cautious, didn't want to glance away from the road. Tracy, eyes wide, saw what she could only describe as a gigantic inverted Christmas tree, adorned with shimmering red lights. Confused and a little frightened, without any reassurance from her mom, Tracy did what most kids would do. She shut her eyes. She silently counted to 30, hoping that when she reopened her eyes, the strange sight would be gone. But the mystery deepened. On opening her eyes, the object seemed to have vanished, only for Tracy to realize it hadn't disappeared. It had moved closer, now looming over a cliff. The lights on the craft changed. They were no longer twinkling, but racing up and down its structure in a mesmerizing pattern. Then, in a sudden shift, the lights went out. Darkness fell, and all that remained was the imposing silhouette of the object against the backdrop of Mount Shasta. In 2007, Sarah found herself on a secluded retreat on the mountain. The nights there were peaceful, the kind that invite deep, undisturbed sleep. But one night, that would change. Her room was pitch dark, yet Sarah could see 6 towering figures standing silently around her bed. Their presence was both imposing and serene. Despite feeling a rush of adrenaline, Sarah sensed no malice from these beings. It was as if they were mere observers, watchers in the night. Struggling to steady her breath, Sarah felt an overwhelming wave of sleepiness. She then fell into a deep sleep unlike anything she'd experienced before. To this day, Sarah doesn't know how long this encounter lasted. Was she dreaming, or was it something more? Years have passed, yet the clarity of that night remains undimmed in her memory. The experience, dream or not, has etched itself permanently in her mind. It's an experience she will never forget. Trey and his partner had a similar experience. They stopped for the night in Mount Shasta. They had planned for a day of hiking. The duo arrived at a motel that seemed almost abandoned, only a handful of cars in the parking lot, and there wasn't a soul in sight. The motel was eerily quiet. They shrugged off the odd silence, settling in with some TV before drifting off to sleep. But restful sleep would not come. Dawn broke with both feeling unusually drained. As they began to pack up, a heavy silence hung in the air. Neither spoke of the night's experiences. Breaking the quiet, Trey hesitantly shared his ordeal of unnerving nightmares that screamed a clear message: they were not welcome on the mountain. To his shock, his partner had been haunted by the same dark dreams. Their packing turned frantic, and soon they were out, but still determined to not let their eerie night spoil their hiking plans. The hike itself was pretty standard, except for a moment when they lost their trail, a common occurrence on Mount Shasta. But it was only after they left that they discovered Mount Shasta's reputation for bizarre happenings, piecing together their own unsettling experience with the stories of many others. So add Trey and his friend to the list of people who will never go back to the mountain. Just a few weeks before I recorded this episode, a listener named James was driving home from Oregon on the I-5. Somewhere between Edgewood and Weed, James noticed an odd distortion of light in his peripheral vision. Small black triangles appeared to be descending like glass, but when he turned to look, they vanished. James said these objects reminded him of glitches in a video game. These strange visions persisted as he drove closer to Mount Shasta. Suddenly, a silk-like cable materialized, emitting a bluish-purple glow. Then it transformed back into a street lamp. James attempted to dismiss these occurrences as mere figments of his imagination. Surprisingly, he felt a sense of tranquility instead of panic. As he approached Shasta Springs, an unexpected tree branch obstructed the road, seemingly appearing out of thin air. Just before impact, James braced himself, but the car passed right through the branch, which had transformed into what he called an ethereal spiderweb. Continuing his journey, he noticed large shadowy figures along the roadside, vanishing whenever he looked directly at them. He observed pulsating orbs of light forming a triangle above his car before quickly disappearing. Eventually, the strange sighting stopped. James felt as though he had looked into another realm, and that realm had looked back. Despite the unsettling nature of these events, James felt secure and serene throughout the entire experience. Another person who wished to remain anonymous said he spent a weekend at Lake Shasta in 2006 on a houseboat. He heard stories about strange happenings and sightings at the lake and the creature living in the lake. The boat, filled with about 10 people, made its way out to a good fishing spot, and the group dropped their lines. This viewer suddenly found himself on the bow of the boat, fishing alone. Some amount of time had passed, but he didn't know how long. The rest of the group was partying at the back of the boat, with music, doing shots, and lots of laughing. Then, things went quiet. No music, no laughing, no sounds of the water or the forest, no sound of any kind. It was as if someone had muted the world. And just as suddenly, the sound was back, as if nothing happened. Later that evening, they heard a splash, and assumed someone was going for a late-night swim. They looked to see who jumped off the boat, but the lake was still, and the only ripples on the water were from the boat. After a quick head count, everyone was found to still be on the boat, but everyone heard the splash. At this point, they decided to cut their trip short and head back home. Now, these aren't random accounts from the depths of the internet. These are your stories from listeners and viewers of the Y-Files. Stories that they hadn't thought of in years. Some people expressed relief at finally being able to share them. These are stories that they've kept secret all their lives. Now, I know how frightening some of these experiences can be, especially when you encounter a shadow person in the middle of the night. I know this because it happened to me, and I'm a skeptic by nature. Open-minded, sure, but I prefer hard evidence to stories and superstition. But to this day, my shadow person experience was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. To this day, more frightening than anything I experienced as a child. I had never even heard of shadow people before that night. But that story, my story, that's for a different episode. He says, this means something, this is important. Well, some experience visions, astral projections, and find themselves leaving their beds and traveling to the mountain, even if they've never been there before. People have also reported disruptions in time and space. Time doesn't move like it should. For some, time moves much faster than it should, while others might experience things moving much more slowly. Others lose time entirely. Some reported being gone for hours when it felt like only a few minutes had passed. Temporal distortion has occurred, where people can't seem to agree in what order certain events happened, or they have difficulty recalling specific details about their time on the mountain. You can experience sudden and drastic changes to your surroundings. The sun can go dim, as if an eclipse was happening without the eclipse. Weather can completely change without warning. People have even reported that the terrain of the mountain itself changes, like a maze rearranging itself in real time. This might sound far-fetched, but it does explain the disappearances of experienced hikers like Landers and others. Melodic music that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere. Strange entities observing at a distance. Hidden tunnels, maze-like landscapes, mysterious visions, and unexplainable disappearances. It's a lot to be happening in one place. And it seems like the mountain is protecting something from outsiders. And there happens to be a theory saying that this is exactly the case. And it's something worth protecting. And to many, the search to find it is worth dying for. The mountain's protecting the Holy Grail. There is a legend of a mystical place associated with magic, healing, and the final resting place of King Arthur. It's called Avalon, and is something that I didn't expect to find in connection with Mount Shasta. King Arthur is a legendary king said to have ruled Britain from Camelot a long time ago. He was said to have been chosen as the king by fate, and proved it by pulling the sword Excalibur from solid stone. One of Arthur's quests led him in search of the Holy Grail, a sacred object of divine power. The Holy Grail is the cup Christ drank from at the Last Supper. It's believed that it can cure illness, restore youth, and even grant immortality. In addition to being King Arthur's resting place, Avalon is also where the Holy Grail is said to be kept, safe from evil. But Mount Shasta can't be Avalon. Mount Shasta is a mountain, and Avalon is an island. Doesn't make any sense. Until you look around Mount Shasta, there isn't another mountain around, not for miles. As I said earlier, it's completely out of place and it stands alone, like an island. Another aspect of Avalon is, it doesn't even exist on Earth. It's in another realm outside of time and space. A realm accessed through portals, like the ones described on Mount Shasta. This has earned Shasta the nickname, the Gateway to Avalon. Some people who've gone to Mount Shasta on spiritual or vision quests returned with experiences they can't explain. Their visions were of symbols and landscapes linked to Arthurian mythology. The beings they encountered were knights and fairies and other figures of the legend. There's also the Lady of the Lake. She was said to be a magical and benevolent enchantress who helped Arthur, giving him a sword, Excalibur. Now, an island would probably need to be pretty big to have a lake on it, unless the island was actually a lonely mountain. And it just so happens, Mount Shasta does have a lake on it. Avalon is often described as a place of beauty, more beautiful than any place on Earth, like the Garden of Eden. And those who find their way to Avalon can be healed of any illness. They can stop aging altogether. It's a place of mystical and spiritual significance that's influenced many cultures, teeming with a magical energy and fiercely guarding sacred treasures and mystical knowledge. Avalon sounds a lot like Mount Shasta. Online, you can find many first-hand stories from people who have had strange experiences on Mount Shasta. I found an interesting post from a man named Greg. He recalled a hiking trip he had with his father. They were on a barren incline called Old Ski Bowl Trail and had come across an odd arrangement of rocks. The rocks were formed into a circle. They thought it was strange, but continued up the trail. Further up near a switchback, they met a father and his son. They exchanged hellos, talked about the trails a bit, and then continued on. No more than 2 minutes later, Greg turned to look back at them, and they were very far down the trail, at least a 20-minute walk away. He thought this must have been someone else, but they looked more closely and it was the same father and son, and there was no one else in sight. Now, this was really strange, but they still continued. They reached the top of a cliff and found another arrangement of rocks, not a circle, but rows like gravestones. Just a minute or so down the trail, they reached a dead end. They would have needed climbing gear to continue forward, so they decided to head back down. As Greg turned around, he noticed a man out of the corner of his eye. He was standing between the rows of the stones, just staring. He wore a button-up shirt and cargo shorts and had a straw hat with a wide brim. He wasn't very far from Greg and his dad, and yet he had no facial features. His face was just blank. He mentioned this to his father, who turned around to look. Then the man ducked behind one of the boulders. Then things get really weird. Greg has no recollection of what happened next, but his dad told him he just started walking. Greg wasn't responding to his father, even when he was shouting at him. When Greg finally snapped out of the trance, he was standing on the edge of a very, very high cliff, and the man was gone. But Greg and his father didn't see where the man went. The only way out of that dead end was to walk past Greg and his dad, but nobody else was on that trail. There was a post from a woman from Europe who was visiting California. She and her boyfriend decided to hike Mount Shasta. After their hike, the woman used the restroom near the parking lot. When she returned to the car, her boyfriend was almost in a state of panic. He was standing by the driver's side door scanning the forest, his eyes darting back and forth. When she got in the car, he jumped in quickly and locked the doors. Confused, she asked him what was wrong. He said, "Didn't you notice it? Didn't you notice there isn't a single sound in the entire forest?" She hadn't, so she got very still and just listened. There was nothing. There were no birds chirping, no animal sounds, not even the sound of wind through the trees. The only sounds they can hear was their own quickened breath. They rolled up the windows and got out of there fast. When the couple got home, they looked up information about Mount Shasta. That's when they realized stories like theirs were not unique. There were more strange experiences on that mountain. Lots more. There have also been a number of Mount Shasta stories from you, viewers and listeners of the Y-Files. Here are a few of my favorites. In 2016, Eric found himself on an adventure. Camping on the tribes have inhabited the area for over 10,000 years, making it one of the longest occupied areas in North America. And each tribe has a myth about the mountain. Some tribes say Mount Shasta is the sacred center of the universe. Others say the mountain is the birthplace of all life. As different as these stories are, there is one theme found in every native legend. You do not go above the tree line. That area is reserved for the Sky People. Not far from Mount Shasta is Petroglyph Point. It has some of the oldest stone writing ever found in North America, dating back thousands of years. And the glyphs depict the types of things you'd expect to see: animals, rivers, the sun, stars. But there are also carvings of what some people believe are Sky People. Native tribes believe the Sky People were spiritual beings who existed in a different realm, a plane of existence where souls and spirits of the dead dwell. But what if the Sky People aren't spirits of the dead, but are actually beings that are very much alive, just not human? There are Native American legends that describe a race of giants that live on Mount Shasta. The Modoc have the Matakagmi, which are said to be the keepers of the woods. Could these ancient people be describing Bigfoot? Matakagmi is the Modoc word for Bigfoot, and it's similar to the Tibetan word Metokangmi, which is their word for Yeti. Since at least the 1920s, people have claimed to see tall creatures roaming the forests around Mount Shasta. In 1976, a camper thought a park ranger was investigating his camp, but upon closer inspection, it was a Bigfoot. Another famous account happened in 1962 when a hiker claimed to have seen a female Bigfoot giving birth. In 1930, a humanoid skeleton over 8 feet tall was discovered near Mount Shasta. And this wasn't a fringe report. It was covered by major newspapers all over the area. And native legends say the race of giants prospered on the earth for thousands of years, but were suddenly wiped out in a great flood. But there is an interpretation of this legend claiming the giants of the woods are not Bigfoot. They are an ancient race of people called Lemurians. People from all over the world have visited Mount Shasta and experienced encounters with what they believe to be Lemurians. Lemurians are from the lost continent of Lemuria. Lemurians thrived for thousands of years on the Earth, but their civilization was eventually wiped out by a great flood, an earthquake, a war, or all three. This disaster caused Lemuria to sink to the bottom of the ocean. Refugees from Lemuria, according to legend, fled to Mount Shasta. There, the Lemurians rebuilt their civilization. The Lemurians are a highly spiritual race who can communicate telepathically, and some people claim they received telepathic messages from the Lemurians while meditating or performing other spiritual practices. These communications seem to be generally positive, messages of guidance or insight. Other people say they actually saw Lemurians while exploring the mountain. They describe the beings as ethereal and mysterious, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. People have dreams and visions of the Lemurians, things like images of their advanced civilization, ancient wisdom, and spiritual guidance. Gatherings are often held on Mount Shasta. Their purpose is to connect with the Lemurian energy there. Even people with no beliefs or expectations report a heightened sense of energy at various points around the mountain. The Lemurians seem to be there, and they're waiting for someone to find them. Which brings us to the fascinating story of J.C. Brown. He's considered the first person to find the lost civilization of Lemuria. But his story takes a mysterious turn. Hey, it's your buddy AJ. I recently discovered this incredible new meal delivery service called Cook Unity. It's been an absolute game changer for me and the wife. We're busy. It's almost impossible to find time to plan and prepare homemade meals. But Cook Unity makes it easy. Now, a few nights a week, we get professionally crafted recipes. They're custom tailored to meet our tastes and lifestyles with minimal work on our end. Meals arrive fresh, never frozen, you just heat them up. I'm talking about restaurant-worthy dishes like pecan-crusted salmon, Tuscan chicken, or vegan jambalaya. That's one of my favorites. All made from quality ingredients by a local chef in a micro kitchen. It's been so helpful having these delicious, fresh, ready-to-cook meals delivered right to my door. And my favorite part is, I don't have to go to the grocery store. And between you and me, Cook Unity meals taste better than anything Jen and I could make ourselves. And don't tell my wife I said that. If you're busy like I am, you've got to try this. Experience chef-quality meals every week delivered right to your door. Head over to cookunity.com/theWiFiles or enter code TheWiFiles before checkout for 50% off your first week. That's 50% off your first week by using code TheWiFiles or going to cookunity.com/TheWiFiles. Get some of those precious hours back. Try Cook Unity today. In 1904, J.C. Brown was working as a geologist for a gold mining operation. He was sent to Mount Shasta to look for gold. During one of Brown's expeditions, he came across a rock fall that looked like something could be buried underneath. When he cleared the rubble, he discovered the entrance to a cave that disappeared into the darkness for it looked like forever. Brown hiked the length of the tunnel, which turned out to be 11 miles long. And that may sound crazy, but Mount Shasta is a volcano. The entire area around the mountain is a network of lava tubes. Lava tubes can be huge and stretch for miles underground. When J.C. Brown reached the end of the tunnel, he found what he described as the remains of an ancient city. He found machinery long abandoned that looked like it was used for a mining operation. He found statues, tablets, shields, and weapons, all made of gold and inscribed with hieroglyphics. He found what he called a worship room with statues that seemed to glow in the dark. And the final chamber of the cave system was a tomb, where 27 giant skeletons were arranged. They ranged in height from 7 feet to over 10 feet tall. Among them was what Brown described as a mummified queen, covered with jewels and laying in a crystal casket. Unsure of what to do, J.C. Brown covered the entrance to the cave and told no one about it. But over the next few years, Brown became obsessed with a book by James Churchward called The Lost Continent of Mu, and stories of Lemuria, which he thought could be the same thing. Lemuria, according to the legend, was an entire continent that sunk beneath the ocean many thousands of years ago. And you might be thinking, this sounds a lot like Atlantis. Well, it turns out Lemuria and Atlantis are connected. In 1899, Frederick Spencer Oliver published a book called A Dweller on Two Planets. It tells an amazing story that was found written on ancient Hindu tablets. Over 1 million years ago, the Earth was ruled by two very advanced civilizations, the Atlanteans and the Lemurians. And both cultures had technology that far exceeds our own. Atlantis was the dominant culture. For many years, Atlantis was benevolent. But about 25,000 years ago, Atlantis became corrupt and wanted to rule all the people on the Earth. Lemurians rejected this idea and wanted to be left alone. And after much internal conflict, Atlantis decided to go to war with the Lemurians. And for years, the two mighty civilizations deployed devastating nuclear weapons against each other. The explosions were so violent that they caused the Earth's tectonic plates to become unstable and the magnetic poles to shift. Finally, a massive flood tore across the planet and laid waste to both civilizations. In all, 60 million Lemurians died. Atlantis suffered severe losses as well. The few surviving Atlanteans evacuated to Agartha, an underground city. The last remaining Lemurians fled to Mount Shasta and established a city called Telos. What's amazing is, there's a Hawaiian legend that says the islands of Hawaii were once part of a vast continent called Mu, also known as Lemuria. Once J.C. Brown learned of these stories, he was convinced that he had found the lost civilization of Lemuria under Mount Shasta. So he decided, now 30 years later, at the age of 74, it was time to go back to the mountain. He told the Dogon that they helped the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Sumerians with their civilizations. But what's really amazing is, The Dogon are aware of the star Sirius B, which the tribe calls Potolo. Sirius B is invisible to the naked eye. It was first discovered in 1862. But the Dogon people had no telescopes. They still don't. Yet not only were they aware of the star Sirius B, they knew it was a white dwarf companion star to the much brighter Sirius A. The Dogon knew the length of Sirius B's orbit in years. They knew the shape of its orbit. They knew it was a dense star. They relayed all this information to a visiting anthropologist in the 1930s. They even said there's a third star in the Sirius system, but there wasn't. Until there was. In 1995, a study concluded that a third companion star exists. More recent studies aren't so sure, but the Dogon people are. Allegedly, the Dogon were also aware of Jupiter's moons and Saturn's rings. Now, skeptics like to poke holes in the Dogon story, and I think that's fine. Like the Dogon were wrong about the number of Jupiter's moons. But they were right about Sirius B. The story of Enoch seems to be based on ancient Sumerian stories, like a lot of the Bible is. When people talk about the Book of Enoch, they're referring to what's officially called First Enoch, because there are 3 books. Biblical scholars consider the books of Enoch pseudepigrapha, that is, a biblical work that falsely claims authorship by a biblical character. That doesn't mean the books of Enoch weren't known or weren't important. In fact, First Enoch is quoted in Jude 14 through 15. Enoch was known and was important, but the book is not considered inspired by God and therefore is apocryphal and not part of canon.
Still a page turner.
Oh yeah, it's a good read. Now, some parts of Enoch are said to have been written later to expand on stories from the Bible, like the birth of Noah and Enoch's visit to heaven. These were interesting characters and people wanted to learn more. So someone, or many someones, we don't know who, just wrote more.
It's like Bible fan fiction.
It's exactly like that. But different religions and denominations are going to have different interpretations. Remember, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church says the book is canon, and that church has been around for almost 3,000 years. Some Christians think reading the book is heresy, a crime against the church. But most scholars consider the Book of Enoch an important text that gives additional insight into the lives and beliefs of the people living at the time. Honestly, whether the Book of Enoch is canon or not, that's not important to me. It's an interesting academic discussion. As you know, I'm not religious, but I am fascinated by and have great respect for religions, all religions. I enjoy the stories, and for the most part, I think they teach good lessons. I'm more into fishes and loaves than fire and brimstone, but that's just my taste. But I know I'm going to hear it in the comments. Every time I do a religious story, I get attacked. In the comments, there's going to be people screaming at me in all caps to take Jesus into my heart or I'm going to hell. If that's what you believe, that's okay. I don't believe that. I don't know what happens after we die. I'm inclined to say nothing, just black. But there's a big piece of my heart that really wants to be wrong. Because when I finally pass on and walk down that tunnel, if I'm greeted by family and friends long past, and I find myself standing at the pearly gates, the first words out of my mouth are going to be, thank God. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. My name is AJ, that's Hecklefish.
Peace be unto the human. Grateful am I for thine eyes that have watched and thine ears that have heard.
This has been the Y-Files. If you had fun or learned anything, do him a favor, subscribe, comment, like, share. Hitting the buttons really helps us out. And like most topics we cover on the channel, today's was recommended by you. So if there's a story you'd like to see or learn more about, go to theyfiles.com/tips. And remember, the Y-Files is also a podcast. Twice a week, I post deep dives into the stories we cover here on the channel. I also post episodes that wouldn't be allowed on the channel. It's called the Y-Files Operation Podcast, and it's available everywhere you get your podcasts. Now, if you need more Y-Files in your life, because who doesn't, check out our Discord server. There are thousands of people, I think we're up to 35,000 members. Well, there's thousands of people on there 24/7, and they're into the same weird stuff that we are. It's a great community, it's a lot of fun, and it's free to join. Now, special thanks to our patrons who make this channel possible. Every episode is dedicated to you, and as you know, I could not do this without your support, so thank you. And if you'd like to support the channel, we'd love you to become a member on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you get access to perks like you see the videos early with no commercials, you get access to merch only available to members, plus you get 2 private live streams every week just for you. Another great way to support the channel is grab something from the Wi-Fi store.
Come forth and partake in our wares, for in your hands they shall find purpose, and through your stewardship their journey shall be fulfilled.
What does that mean?
Grab a Hecklefish t-shirt, a festival mug, or a deck of Go Hecklefish cards, or a hookie, or one of those, not a hookie, a hoodie, or one of those squeezy stuffed animal Hecklefish toilet now fish toy.
That's gonna do it. Until next time, be safe, be kind, and know that you are appreciated.
And Area 51, a secret code inside the Bible said I would. I love my UFOs and paranormal fun, as well as music, songs hanging like I should. But then another conspiracy